around that time when we were realizing we weren't going to be able to hit the actual monument, and trying to plan what we were going to do instead, I realized that this whole thing was never about walking every step of the trail. It wasn't about, making sure I had walked every single of those 2,653 miles. It was about the experience.
Welcome back to the World Extreme Medicine podcast with myself, Owen Walker, and Lauren McKenna. In this interview, we're speaking with Becky Hartshorn on her successful completion of the Pacific Crest Trail. So the title of the podcast is The Adventure of a Lifetime, Hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. So what we wanted to do in the podcast is just do a deep dive into what is America's second longest trail, stretching from Mexico to Canada. And it stretches throughout the states of California, Oregon, and Washington. So the route takes in many of America's most scenic and varied terrains, from deserts to mountains to alpine plateaus. So the Pacific Crest Trail, or the PCT, is 2,650 miles long. It starts in Campo, in a small town in the United States-Mexican border, and it goes stretched all the way through California, Oregon, Washington, before it reaches the northern terminus at the United States-Canada border. So the trail is divided into 30 sections, 18 sections in California, 7 in Oregon, 5 in Washington. So the average length of each section is approximately about 91 miles. So just to give you a quick bio on Becky Hartshorn, she's a junior clinical fellow, so an F5 doctor currently working in emergency medicine in Sheffield. So she's interested in wilderness and expedition medicine, and has completed one of WEM's courses in Slovenia, and is working on her mountain leader qualification. She's also a keen hiker and wants to be able to keep racking up the miles, as well as having a career in emergency medicine. So welcome to the podcast, Becky.
Thank you very much. I'm very flattered that you wanted me to come on.
Listen, it's great to have you on with myself and Lauren. I think just as a starter, Becky, could you maybe just speak to this epic hike in the US? Could you maybe speak to why you undertook this hike?
Well, I live in the Peak District, so I've always had sort of a good outdoor area around me, and I kind of grew up hiking out there, going on family walks at the weekend and things. And then I did my gold DV, like bronze, silver, and gold Duke of Edinburgh Award when I was at uni. And it was when we did the gold expedition for that I really kind of properly got into hiking, because we went up to the Isle of Mull to do that, and that was just incredible. And then I first found out about the Pacific Crest Trail, the PCT. I think it was about 2014, and that's when I went to work at a Girl Scout summer camp in California. And I think it was there that I found out about it, because I've been asked the question a lot about where did you first hear about it. I can't exactly remember, but I'm pretty sure it must have been then. And ever since then, it's just fascinated me, really. And I felt, rather than why did I do it, I felt like I couldn't not do it. It's never really sort of left me. And in terms of why I chose to do it when I did, it was kind of just the earliest convenient time I could do it, really, because you need to have a fair few months to be able to go and do it. And I was at medical school when I found out about it, so I couldn't really just take a year off med school quite easily. So my original plan was to do it in 2021, at which point I would have been an F3, so I would have completed my foundation training. I would have done another 6 months of being an F3 doctor, so I wouldn't have gone into any kind of training program, and then taken 6 months or a year off to go and do the PCT then. But unfortunately, there was a global pandemic which got in the way of that, and in 2021, the travel restrictions to the US were still quite stringent, and you couldn't just go and hike there. So hence why I did it in 2022. So I just wanted to go and do it, to go and spend a long time hiking somewhere that I'd never been before, and try and see as much of the terrain that is around that area.
A big challenge for yourself. With that, what was the kit preparation like? So there's obviously the quality of the kit, and indeed you've got to do some of the mental and bushcraft preparation. So what was sort of that like before the trip?
A lot of the kit I did already have because as I've mentioned, I've done quite a lot of hiking before. So I've done the West Highland Way in 2019, so that's up in Scotland. And I bought a lot of the kit to do that, and sort of just generally accumulated kit over a few years just through various weekends away and little trips. So I already had my main things like my tent, my sleeping bag, sleeping pad, and rucksack. So a lot of the stuff that I had to buy was sort of the smaller things. The shoes that I was going to wear, because you get through several pairs of shoes because you're covering such a long distance. So sort of finding a pair of shoes that I liked that I could then get while I was out there as well when I needed new ones. The clothes, the smaller things like a stove and a pot and things like that. There's a lot of information out there. Once you start looking into the world of ultra lightweight gear, it becomes a total rabbit warren, and you find yourself spending hours and hours looking for the lightest long-handled spoon or the pair of socks that weigh the least, or it becomes slightly ridiculous, and then you have to have a bit of a reality check with yourself and realize at the end of the day it is just a pair of socks or whatever. So with kit preparation, it was a lot of time spent reading online, and then ordering various things, trying them out, sending them back, taking them on weekends away, and then reading a lot of Amazon reviews as well. In terms of bushcraft, although it's considered wilderness, a lot of the trail, you really don't need any serious bushcraft skills, to be honest. You're not starting fires with twigs and stuff like that. Most people have quite high-tech kit, so you don't really need to go foraging for anything or doing anything that requires much Bear Grylls style skills, to be honest. The main preparation really is just making sure that you're familiar with your kit, that you know sort of your own limits as well of keeping yourself safe when you're out there, and knowing what food you're going to want to eat as well, because when you're away for that length of time, you need to have a good few meals on rotation so you don't get completely sick of the same things. But the main preparation I did really was just going out and hiking, testing my gear that as I bought it, testing my own capabilities and just going with that really. When I did the West Highland Way, that taught me quite a lot, because I did that over 4.5 days. That's 96 miles. And I did that by myself. That was my first time using a few bits of gear that I bought. And more than teaching me about my gear, it taught me more about the mental toll that hiking by yourself can have on you. And that's not something I'd really anticipated until I did that. But you spend a lot of your time alone on these hikes. So even though something like the PCT, there are a few thousand people that do it every year, and you're passing people all the time, but a lot of your time you are by yourself with your own thoughts, and that can get quite draining sometimes, because you just sort of circling around in your own thoughts and struggling up a horrible mountain, or it might be throwing it down with rain or whatever. And sometimes you need a little bit of a lift from a friend or another hiker just to help you that little bit. So a sense of community is definitely something that's important, and that's something that I coming out of the West Highland Way, but before going into the PCT, was sort of hoping for. But you'll never feel fully prepared for something like this, to be honest. That's almost part of the adventure. I spoke to a lot of people while I was out there who had done a hell of a lot of planning for exactly how many miles they were going to do each day, exactly the day they wanted to finish on, and things like that. And then you get out there and there's so many unpredictable things that you just realise that you can never be fully prepared. But that's fine. That's part of the fun, part of the adventure.
So Becky, you make a really good point there around preparation, but also you growing into yourself through trips and learning about yourself, learning about self-care, mental resilience, what you are prepared to go through, and indeed using an analog of comparison of what you have been through to fall forwards into bigger trips like the PCT from the West Highland Way. But maybe could you speak to your sense of self-care around food and shelter? It's sort of how you resupplied yourself, how you packed for food, how you resupplied food, but also shelter and water.
Yeah, so that's one of the big things that people worry about or try to plan before they start is a resupply strategy. And there's so many different strategies that you can have. And it's something that you can plan as little or as much as you want, really. The trail itself doesn't go straight through many towns or sort of communities at all. Most of them that you have to access, you access by road. So at certain points, the trail will cross some kind of road, whether it does cross a few major highways or a couple of interstates, but a lot of the time they're sort of dirt tracks or side roads. And to get into town to resupply, you rely on hitching most of the time, which the first time you do it is a bit scary, but you get so used to it. It's your main form of getting anywhere, to be honest. And most of the time you're with other people, so it's not too scary. But when you go into town, most of the towns had small grocery stores or sometimes just a petrol station. So most of the time you could make do with what they sold. And a lot of these towns actually rely on the hiking community for a lot of their income into the town. So they know what hikers want from years of experience, and they do stock a lot of things like instant mashed potato, noodles, protein bars, the things that they know hikers will want to buy. But some of the places are so small that there's not really much more than a petrol station where you can get a few snacks. And when you're trying to do a 7-day food supply, you kind of need more than just a few chocolate bars. So what a lot of places do have, even if they've not got a big supermarket, is a post office, or even if it's not a post office, somewhere that will send out or receive packages. So what you tend to do at those places, or before you get to those places, is send a box. So say I was in, there's a town quite near the start called Idlewild. It's sort of the first major town that hikers access. They've got a brilliant supermarket there. So you'll buy your food that you're going to eat for the next 5 or 6 days, or however much you're going to need to last you until the next town stop or the next decent resupply point. And what you also do is buy enough food to last for the section beyond that as well. And then you pack that second lot of food into a box and you ship it forward to yourself further up the trail. So that was how I did quite a lot of my resupplying. What other people did is, if they were from within the United States and were mega organised, is pack all their boxes before they even left. Now, I think even if I lived within the US, I don't think I could deal with that level of preparation. There's some advantages of that in that it's probably cheaper because you can bulk buy everything, you know what you're getting. But there are some disadvantages in that if you have packed yourself 4 or 5 months worth of boxes and you've got instant mashed potato in all of them, and then after week 2 on the trail you decide you hate instant mashed potato, you're a little bit screwed, unless you kind of just get rid of all that food. So there's pros and cons. I quite liked that I could just buy what I wanted each time, and only had to do a few of the sending boxes forward, because it meant you could mix it up a little bit more than if you were sending all your boxes from home. In terms of shelter, most of the time it was just wild camping on the trail. You didn't have to book camp spots or anything like that. It's not really like a lot of the European hiking trails where there's a hut system. That doesn't really exist on the PCT. There's the odd hut or ranger's hut in some of the national parks that you can stay in, but most of the time it is just wild camping, or there's the odd campground which may or may not be manned by a ranger or something, and occasionally they'll have a pit toilet in those campgrounds. a lot of the time the pit toilets are gross and you'd just rather go and dig your own hole somewhere, to be honest. And then in town, most of the time I'd stay in a motel or B&B or something like that, which can get expensive. That's why most hikers tend to share with other hikers, or you stay with your friends that you've made by that point as well. The other option for town is staying with people called trail angels. So this is a whole community of people that live near the trail or the town surrounding the trail, and they open up their homes to hikers, let them wash their clothes there, let them shower there and things like that. And often it's just for the cost of sharing a few stories and maybe a monetary donation. So that's a way of keeping the cost down, because that's often cheaper than staying in the motels that are around the towns.
That sounds really interesting, and a lot of preparation goes into it, even if you're not sending your packages forward the way you're saying there. With that, while camping, what would you do for your water? So how would you make your water clean enough to drink? So there are a few options like halogens, UV pens, or filters.
I, like most of the people on the trail, used a filter. So the one I used was called a soya squeeze, and that was the most popular one that most people had. Some people use gravity filters, like you can get a platypus one where it's just like a platypus bladder. You hang that from a tree and then it drains through into another bladder or bottle via a filter. I saw a couple of people using purification tablets. I don't think I saw anyone using the UV pens. I think they've got a little bit out of fashion, really. But yeah, the vast majority just had a smart water plastic bottle, or a couple of those, with the soya filter attached on top, and then you just squeeze it into another bottle. So most of the time we were getting our water from streams or lakes. Just wild water most of the time. There were some long stretches where you would have to really plan where you were going to get your water, because some of the sections were known to be quite dry, particularly down in the desert. So there were a couple of times I had to do 30 or 40 mile water carries, and that was pretty tough. You're sort of carrying, I think the most I carried was 6 litres of water, and it's pretty grim, because water's so heavy. And on some of those longer sections, we were lucky to have trail angels supplying water for that area. So a couple of times you'd come across these vast collections of, those plastic water cache things that you put on top of a water cooler in like an office. It's quite weird. You just walking through the desert, you round a corner and then there's about 50, 60 blue canisters of water. It's quite an odd sight, but a very one you're very grateful for at the time. But yeah, most of the time you just gather in your own water. And when you're in the Sierra, so that's the highest elevation area of the trail in the center of California, I was told there that at the elevation that you're at, a lot of the water is just pure snowmelt, and you don't really need to filter it, because there's such a slim chance of it actually having any sort of contaminant in it. But I always got too scared and I always filtered it.
So Becky, just looking at the financial implications of the trip, and you're away for a significant amount of time. It's definitely burdensome on kits. It's burdensome on supplies for food, shelter, water. I guess my question is, sort of, when people are costing up a trip like this, how much would you expect an overall spend to be on the PCT?
That's something that can really vary, depending on how much money you have to spend in the first place, obviously, and how much you're willing to spend on the trip. So there's the expected costs that you will have to incur during your trip. So that's mainly food and accommodation and any transport that you need to either get to or from the trail, or to various towns when you're on the trail. Now, food cost was something I underestimated a little bit, to be honest. Food prices in America are just a little bit crazy, and because I was eating about 5,000 calories a day, it it got quite expensive, but you have no option other than to buy it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to complete your trip if you not giving yourself the calories that you need. So yeah, food, accommodation, transport were the main outgoings I had. The unexpected ones that people need to bear in mind that you may incur are gear replacements. So I unfortunately had to replace my rucksack while I was out there. It was an Osprey, so they do have a warranty scheme. It's actually pretty good. They have a lifetime warranty. You get in touch with them, and if you're a through hiker, they try and send you a replacement pack to the next town you're going to be going through, and then they send your old one off to try and recycle it for further use. But unfortunately, the pack that I had, they didn't have any replacement ones in stock, so I did have to fork out for a new one, which was a bit annoying, but definitely needed. Shoes are another thing that I suppose they're probably an expected cost, really, because there's no way you can walk 2,500 miles in one pair of shoes. Most people wear trail runners, so they've got thinner soles than walking boots, and you tend to need to replace those every between 400 and 600 miles is what's recommended, really. And then the other unexpected cost that I'd tell people to watch out for is just medical costs. I was lucky enough that I didn't need any medical treatment or anything while I was out there, but particularly if you're an international hiker going to hike in the US, it's just something you need to be aware of, that healthcare costs in the US can get pretty expensive. Then the other things, if you're an international hiker, would be flights, obviously, to get to and from the US. And then also, while you're there, transaction fees for the things that you're paying for if you're paying on card. So I actually got I set up a separate bank account with a bank that doesn't charge transaction fees when you're using the card abroad. And another way you can get around that is if you're sharing accommodation with hikers that are from the US, just get them to pay for the motel or whatever it is, and then pay them back in cash. So then you can sort of avoid those fees. But in terms of how much people can anticipate to spend, I'd say including flights, if you're coming from outside the US, all your gear. So say you're starting with absolutely nothing, you're having to buy everything, tent, sleeping bag, everything. I'd probably say realistic cost is between £8,000 and £10,000, and that would be for everything from getting nothing to getting you back home after your trip. It's more than I thought I would spend, but because I've been planning to do this for a long time and saving for it for a long time, I was fortunately able to cope with the costs.
Yeah, that sounds it's a big commitment, isn't it? Going away for that length of time. I mean, it's a big holiday, but a challenging time.
It's not a holiday. I will not accept it being called a holiday. It was hard work, but it was fun.
No, that's very fair. That's very fair. Can you talk about the different, like the diversity of terrain that you'll encounter over the 2,650 miles?
Yeah, with it being such a long distance, obviously you pass through a lot of different terrains. So Owen said at the start that the trail's split into 30 sections, which is that's correct. That's kind of how the maps are split if you buy the paper maps. But when you're on the trail, you kind of think of it in 5 sections. So there's South California, or the desert. There's the Sierra. There's North California, there's Oregon, and there's Washington. So they're the 5 sections that hikers tend to think of when they're on the trail. And as you pass through those, you see all terrains. And not only are you going a long way across, you also go a long way up and down. The elevation on the trail really varies. So the lowest point on the trail is called Cascade Locks, which is just at the Oregon-Washington border, and that's only 140 meters above sea level. Whereas the high point of the trail, which is in the Sierra, is Forester Pass, and that's 13,153 feet. So that's within that elevation, you naturally see a lot of different terrains. So down at the desert, which is the first section of the trail from the Mexican border, that was really surprising to me. I kind of just expected it to be very arid, dry, and just sort of sand. But it was actually really green and really colourful. I think it was probably the section that I saw the most colour in, which really surprised me. There's a lot of cacti, obviously, and a lot of those had flowers on. There was a lot of different coloured rock, and a lot of green areas as well, which was really surprising. Then into the Sierra, which is the next section, that's sort of from around mile 700. It becomes a lot higher up in elevation, and with that you get a lot of changes. So depending on the time you start, you'll see a lot of snow. Most people start the trail between March and May if they're going northbound, which is what most hikers do. And if you start in early March, then you can expect a hell of a lot of snow in the Sierra. This year was actually quite a low snow year. I started in mid-April. And by the time I got to the Sierra, there was still snow on the passes that you have to go over, but there was nothing too dangerous. I did have micro spikes. I only needed them twice, and I didn't have an ice axe. I didn't actually see anyone using an ice axe at all. But yeah, in the Sierra, there's a lot more sort of icy conditions. There's a lot of alpine lakes, which are really beautiful, and the best bath you'll ever have, even if it is the shortest bath. And there's a lot of lush meadows there as well, which are just sort of really gorgeous. So the Sierra contains Yosemite National Park, which the trail does actually pass through. It doesn't go through Yosemite Valley, which is what most people will be familiar with. It kind of skirts around the edge, but you pass through some gorgeous valleys through there. Then North California, so that's the third section. That gets a lot rockier. So there's less snow because it's lower elevation. And there's sort of fewer higher passes. Loads of beautiful flower meadows there. That was probably the second most colourful section after the desert. And a lot of lakes around there as well. But it also got very humid at points. There were some big forest areas in North California. And in there, it could almost feel like a rainforest at times. You just feel soaked in sweat from the minute you got up till the minute you went to bed. And along with having a lot of forest, unfortunately, there's a lot of burn zones. So I think most people will be quite familiar with the west coast of America, particularly California, experiencing a lot of really severe wildfires, particularly over the past 5 to 10 years. And the trail in North California, and including the midpoint of the trail, does actually pass through a very large burn zone that was caused by the Dixie Fire, which was in 2021. And that burnt over 900,000 acres of land, including 4 small towns as well, which is completely devastating. And when you're walking through it, it's just you cannot believe the scale of it. But that terrain is, again, very different because you're basically walking on ash and soot, and you just get completely filthy because everything's just black. So that is a little bit depressing, but I think it's important to realise that reality of when you're doing these long hikes, or even if it's not a long hike, you have to accept the reality that a lot of our natural environments are unfortunately scarred from natural disasters or man-made disasters as well. So the Dixie Fire was actually caused by a tree falling on a power line, but there's fires that have been caused by all different reasons. And then moving into Oregon after that, Oregon's known as the Green Tunnel because it is a lot of forest and just green land. But something that surprised me there was there's also a lot of volcanic rock. So a lot of the land in Oregon is on just basically solid lava, which was something I wasn't expecting, and can be quite hard on your ankles at times when you're just walking over just blocks of lava. And then up into Washington, that was just stunning. I think Washington was probably the section of the trail that was the most awe-inspiring to me, I think. You're just walking through a lot of really expansive landscapes with huge mountains on either side. When you Google the Pacific Crest Trail, a lot of the pictures you'll see will be of large flower meadows with huge mountains in the background. A lot of the time they're pictures from Washington. It's just really, really stunning. So going back to the original question, yeah, you do pass through a lot of different terrains, and that's it's something that's really nice about the trail. Actually, is that you're covering such a long distance, it'd be quite easy to get bored and start taking it for granted. But because it's changing all the time, you really don't.
So Becky, just looking at sort of the average distances you were covering per day, could you maybe speak to what you were covering, and also indeed what you had in your mind from sort of an ideal completion time for the PCT?
Yeah, so when I'd been doing the research beforehand, reading about the trail, reading blogs, watching videos, most people tend to complete it in between 3.5 and 6 months. So 3.5 is mega speedy. And there's people every year that are trying to set the FKT, the fastest known time, and they'll do it in like less than that. So I was never aiming for anything like that. My ideal I always said when people asked me, is around 5 months. And I did it in sort of 4.5. So it was, just a little bit ahead of that. But I never really had a sort of a strict target that I was aiming for. I quit my job before I left, so I didn't have anything to rush back for with that. The only limiting things really were how far my legs would carry me, and how much money I had really. But the first day I only did 15 miles, and I think I probably could have done more, but I didn't want to go out of the stocks too hard, to be honest. Something I was worried about before I set off was pushing myself too much too early on and getting injured, which I'd heard other hikers doing. And depending on how severe the injury is that you get, that could have been trip ending, and that would have been pretty devastating. So I tried to ease myself into it. But you very quickly just build up the stamina and the strength in your legs, because you're just doing the same thing every day. So after the first couple of weeks, I was doing low 20s every day in terms of miles, and then by a month in, and for the rest of the trail, probably mid to high 20s up to 30. I think the longest day I did was 33 miles, and it becomes the same amount of effort to do 30 miles as it would have been for me to do 15 miles on that first day. And you don't even really notice yourself increasing your strength and your stamina. It just kind of happens. You just suddenly realize, oh, I've walked 30 miles today and I feel okay. But you're walking for a long period of time. It's not like you're doing those 30 miles in sort of 4 or 5 hours. We were getting up at 5:30 in the morning, walking by around 6:15, something like that, and then obviously have breaks throughout the day. But we were setting up camps at 6-7 p.m. So you're going for, minus breaks, probably 10-11 hours of the day with hiking. So you really can cover a decent amount of distance.
You were speaking earlier about the different types of terrain with the desert and then some of the forest areas. What were some of the risks from the indigenous animals on the PCT? So from bears to snakes to ticks even? Yeah,
so one of the main things people ask me when they find out I've done the trail or heard I've done this kind of hiking is, did you see any bears? I did. But you don't see them as a threat, because the bears that you encounter on the trail are black bears. So the bears people think of as the scary ones are the grizzly bears. They're the brown bears, and you'd be very, depending how you see it, lucky or unlucky to see one of those. There's only about 1,500 of them left in the US outside of Alaska, and so in like the lower 48 states. And one's not been seen on the PCT since 2010. So I was never really scared of seeing a grizzly. The bears I saw were black bears, like I say, and they're quite skittish a lot of the time. They're often more scared of you than you would be of them. Some of them are quite used to seeing humans, so they will sort of stop and look inquisitively at you before scuttling off. I saw 2 bears. So the first one was actually quite near a town. It was the day I got back onto trail after a town day. It was probably a couple of miles out of the town, and it just ran straight across the trail and into the trees. Didn't look back, just ran straight off. And then the second one was in Oregon, and that was I spotted it around 100 meters ahead of me up the trail, sort of quite a straight section of trail, and it was just eating some berries or something from a tree. And what you're supposed to do when you see the black bears is try and make yourself as big as possible and as loud as possible. So you're supposed to shout, bang your poles, try and scare it away. But in reality, what most people do when they see one of these bears is they have the cameraman never dies mentality and video the bear, take pictures of it, and then try and scare it away, which you're probably not supposed to do, because you're supposed to not make them have sort of much contact with humans. But yeah, you're supposed to make yourself big, bang your poles, and they usually just sort of look at you and then scuttle off. So I didn't really feel scared by bears. I know a few people who heard bears coming into their camping areas at night time. I think that if that had happened to me, I think I probably would have felt a little bit more worried, but it never did. And there's certain precautions that you take to try and stop that from happening. So there's a section of the PCT where it's mandated to store your food and any sort of smelly items like toothpaste and stuff like that inside a bear canister. So that's a big plastic tub with sort of screw-on lid that is pretty much impossible for a bear to open, because they have such a good sense of smell. If you just kept your food in your tent in like a dry bag or whatever, it'd smell it, it'd come in, bother you in the night and get your food. So there's a large section of the Sierra that it's mandated to use a bear cam to stop that from happening. The other things that we encountered, I saw quite a few snakes. Down in the desert, there's some rattlesnakes, which you don't want to make them angry. Just if you see one, from a safe distance, you can stamp your feet on the ground, because they sense the vibrations through the ground. They don't have external ears, so if you make yourself loud to a snake, it's not going to hear you. But just sort of stamping your feet until it sort of scuttles off. And then most of the snakes I saw were garter snakes, so they're non-poisonous snakes that will just quite often slide between your legs when you're walking on the path, which can make you jump, but it's nothing more threatening than that. I didn't get any ticks, luckily. I know a couple of people that did, but I don't know anyone that got any serious sort of tick bites, which is fortunate. The other things that I saw were deer. They were more of a pest than anything, to be honest, which sounds awful, but the first few times you see them, they're really amazing. You can get really close to them, particularly in the national parks where they are more used to seeing people. But then when they start trying to come and eat the handles of your poles to lick the salt off them in the middle of the night, or scuttling around your campsite, or licking up the area where you peed in the night before, it gets a little bit annoying, because they just disturb your sleep. But yeah, there was probably a period of the trail where I was seeing deer nearly every day, so you do get really used to them. Mice were something that I never had an issue with, but I know several hikers that had their tent nibbled through by mice that were trying to get in to get their food. And then the only other things I saw that I can think of were a couple of scorpions in a couple of the pit toilets. And then on my very first day, around 8 miles in, I saw a tarantula right in front of me on the trail, which was not something I'd been anticipating to see. And luckily I never saw one again, so I'm not a huge fan of spiders.
So Becky, just as you were hiking, you've got this epic 2,650 mile trek, weather fronts coming in, going out, hot weather, cold weather, wet weather, windy weather. Could you maybe speak to the variety of weather that you saw, and indeed maybe what was the worst weather you experienced?
2022 on the whole was a pretty good year for weather. In terms of the trail, we were very lucky. So I only actually got rained on about 5 or 6 times, I think, which was very different to when I did the West Highland Way, where it rained for the entire time. So it was quite nice to not have to worry about drying your waterproofs and stuff every day. My tent did get wet quite a lot, but that was mainly just because of condensation if we'd camped near water. And most of the time, to be honest, I wasn't even using my tent. We were just what's called cowboy camping, so just camping out under the stars, because the vast majority of the time it was dry. So mainly dry, pretty hot in the desert, but then also in North California as well, because by the time I was in NorCal, it was the middle of summer. It was like late July, and that was getting up to sort of 40 degrees Celsius a day, which can be pretty grim. But the worst weather was probably the storm that happened when I was in, I was still in North California at that point, and it happened overnight, and it was just absolutely apocalyptic. It was a proper thunder and lightning storm. We'd put our tents up luckily that night before the rain had started, and I was lying in my tent and I could feel the ground vibrating with the strength of the thunder. It was biblical. And then the lightning, even with your eyes shut, it was sort of flashing in the backs of your eyes. I didn't get much sleep that night, and quite a few people had flooded tents because it was just so crazy. But that was the only sort of big storm, really. There were a couple of other smaller thunderstorms that passed over in about half an hour. That one lasted pretty much all night, but on the whole, I was really lucky. The heat was more of an issue than the water. Heat and humidity.
So, for somebody wanting to do this epic trail, myself included, if I'm honest, what elements or level would you suggest from a bushcraft or map reading, or even just a general outdoor experience perspective?
I would say that you probably don't need as much experience as you think. In terms of navigation, there is basically no navigation required. It's very minimal. The vast majority of hikers on the trail use an app called Far Out, which anyone that's done a long distance hike might be familiar with, because you can get most of the popular long distance trails particularly in the US. I think there's quite a lot of European ones are going on it now as well. You can download the map for the trail on that app, and it's basically like Google Maps. It shows your little marker point of your position. Even when you've not got signal, it still works. And then the trail is just marked as a really long red line. So as long as you're on the red line, you know that you're in the right place. And when you're on the trail, there's physical markers as well called waypoints, or the Americans call them blazers. And it's just a little symbol of the PCT, or it might even just say PCT, stuck to a tree or on like a signpost if you're in a national park, that's just pointing you in the right direction. So as long as you've got some awareness of what's going on around you, you can't go too far wrong. In terms of other bits of preparation, the main thing I'd say really is buying your gear in advance and just being familiar with it before the trail. So you wouldn't want to turn up and not know how to put your tent up on the first night. That'd be A, embarrassing, and B, not very safe. But yeah, I think it's important to test out your gear, because as amazing as it might sound online, or in the video that you watched of some vlogger that's done various trails and happens to be sponsored by the company, when you're using it in practice, it might not be as good as you thought it would be, or it might just not be suitable for you. The group of friends that I made on the trail, we all used different tents. We all absolutely loved our tents, and we said we'd never use anything else. But it comes down to personal preference in the end, and I think you only work out what you prefer by trying out that bit of gear or whatever it is. Other bits of preparation I'd say is just have some basic level of knowledge of staying safe in the wilderness. So I talked a little bit about knowing how to manage your food when you're in bear country and things like that. So knowing how to store your food safely, knowing a little bit about storm safety. So if there's a massive lightning storm going on, don't go and climb to the highest point above the tree line and walk along the ridge to get a cool view of the storm, because you could get struck by lightning. And then things like water preparation and carrying your water safely as well. So just basic backcountry skills really, but nothing more than that. And then the leave no trace principles, which some people may be familiar with or maybe not. That's just a set of principles about saying keep the outdoors as a wild space. Don't go carving your name into trees. Make sure you're burying your human waste safely and carrying your toilet paper out with you. Yeah, it sounds grim, but you wouldn't want to be camping on top of a load of dirty toilet paper that someone from the night before has left. But the main thing really is just go out and hike, build up a bit of fitness, but more importantly, I think build up the confidence to know that you can go and do something that may sound completely unachievable and overwhelming. If on the first day of the trail I'd thought, right, I've done 15 miles, only 2,635 to go, I don't think I would have made it. You have to sort of break it down into smaller chunks than that to make it more manageable. But yeah, I think just getting out and hiking, testing your gear, building your confidence. And I met people on the trail that had all levels of experience. I met someone who was doing the PCT for the third time. I met people who had done the other two main popular long distance trails in the US, which are the Appalachian Trail, which is on the West Coast, and then the Continental Divide Trail. So the PCT, the Continental Divide Trail, and the AT together make up what's called the Triple Crown. So people that had done all three trails are known as Triple Crowners. So I met people that were doing the PCT to complete their Triple Crown. And I also met people that all they'd done before was go on short weekend camping trips with their family or friends. And the PCT was the first sort of step into wild camping or anything they'd ever done. And, you know, those people still made it. They just developed their experience along the way. So I would say, yeah, don't be put off by thinking you don't have any or enough experience.
Becky, could you speak to some of the interesting characters you met along the way?
Oh, there's so many. Yeah, you passing through a lot of these small towns in, you know, the back end of California and stuff. You do meet some interesting people. A lot of the trail angels who either gave me and my friends rides into town or let us stay at their house. They were incredible people. There's a couple who live in San Diego who help hikers out before they even start the trail. So everyone on the trail has a trail name. So it might sound a bit childish, but once you're in the hiking community, it's just something that happens. So there's a couple who are in their 60s and they're called Scout and Frodo, that's their trail names, who every year will host PCT hikers at their house before the hikers start the trail. So they've got a house in the suburbs of San Diego with quite a big garden, and they host up to 30 hikers a night, just let them camp in their garden. They feed them, drive them to the gear store to get last minute gear, drive them to the supermarket, just chat with them about anything the hikers are worried about, because these guys have already done the PCT before. And I stayed with them before I started, and it was just a great place to meet other hikers as well that know exactly how you're feeling, sort of on the edge of this incredible adventure. You're scared, you're nervous, but you're also really excited. So meeting other people before I even start, which was really nice. So yeah, they were a great pair, that couple. Another character is the legend that is Mayor Max. So this guy, or dog, should I say, is the mayor of Idlewild. So Idlewild, which I think I mentioned earlier, is one of the first towns you pass through in Southern California. Or, well, you pass near it and then most people go into it. And the mayor of the town is a dog called Max. He's a golden retriever. So unfortunately, Mayor Max II, who was the mayor at the time I passed through the town in early May, he unfortunately died in July this year. So that was very sad, and it was a huge loss to not only Idlewild but the PCT community. But he has since been replaced by Mayor Max III. But I did get to meet Mayor Max II while I was in town. He's a very sociable mayor, and loved meeting people. Another pretty cool person that I met was a lady called Morgan, who she herself had done the PCT, I think in 2019. I can't remember what year she did it. Anyway, she's a American lady who's a physiotherapist, and she actually set up her own business based around helping PCT hikers. So it's called Blaze Physio, and it was the first year this year that she'd run her business on the trail. But she basically drove up trail following the main bubble of hikers, and would stop at various points in the popular towns that hikers would stay in and just help you out with any injuries that you had. So she helped me out when I had shin splints. She helped out people that had got rolled ankles, or she even had to send a few people to get x-rays because they got stress fractures, things like that. But she saved a lot of people's hikes just by giving them basic advice on how to manage MSK injuries, showing people how to safely tape muscle injuries, and things like that. And you just sort of paid her a PayPal donation for her time and her assessment. But I think it's a pretty cool business idea, and I know that she's going to do it again next year and hopefully expand to cover other trails as well. And she's just doing it all out the back of a van that she's kitted out. So pretty cool character.
So finally, as we come into finish, could you talk about any revelations that you had once you'd completed this amazing hike? Also, any take-home messages you'd give to people wanting to do?
Yeah, I would say, I think the main revelation for me, which actually came rather than being after the trail, was probably just before the end of the trail, was when I was probably about 100 miles from the end. And so by that point, you're kind of thinking of, well, all the time you're thinking what you're going to do after trail, and sort of thinking, oh no, the end is nigh. What am I going to do after this? But around 100 miles before the end of trail, I found out that the last 30 miles of the trail before you hit the monument at the USA-Canada border, that section had been shut because of forest fires in the area. So I remember when me and my friends found out, and we were absolutely gutted, because for weeks you in your mind you're thinking of reaching that monument. You see hundreds of pictures online, like on Instagram, before you even do the trail, of people celebrating at this monument. It just becomes like a sort of a beacon for you, and something that you think about a lot. So finding out that we weren't going to be able to get to it because there was no sign of that last bit of trail opening anytime soon was initially really devastating. But we managed to find a way of still crossing the border. We actually got off trail around 60 miles before the end at a point called Rainy Pass, which is one of the main roads that the trail crosses, hitched 30 miles west to a lake called Ross Lake, and then kayaked up that lake about 20-30 miles, and it actually crosses the border, the lake. So we kayaked across the border rather than hiking across it, which was a pretty cool way to end. And so around that time, when we were realizing we weren't going to be able to hit the actual monument, and trying to plan what we were going to do instead, I realized that this whole thing was never about walking every step of the trail. It wasn't about, making sure I had walked every single of those 2,653 miles. It was about the experience as a whole, the people I met, the unexpected encounters or the unexpected things that happened, and that was what makes it an adventure. So no matter how much you plan, you don't know what's going to happen, and something like that was completely out of my control. I can't control forest fires, and it still was an incredible experience, even though I couldn't walk all of those miles. And at some point I will go back and do those last 60, but I realized that it wasn't about just the miles. I think take home messages, really, I'd say if you want to go and do something like this, it doesn't have to be this exact thing. It doesn't even have to be a long distance hike. Whatever it is that you want to go and do that would be an adventure for you, life isn't going to just stop so you can go and do it. You have to make it happen yourself. That could mean massive compromises with work or whatever else is going on in your life, but you've got to go and make these opportunities happen for yourself if you're fortunate enough to be able to. And the final thing I'd say, really, I think, is don't be put off by fear or lack of experience or lack of confidence. When I finished that trail, I felt like I could do anything. But at the start, I didn't know if I was going to finish it. I daren't say to anyone that I was confident about completing it or not, because I didn't know if I would. But yeah, don't let fear and lack of confidence hold you back.
Becky, listen, that's fantastic. And just a really almost a stoic principle, really, of sort of controlling what you can and letting the rest kind of happen around you, but just being at peace with that. I think that's a fantastic principle to end with. We just want to thank you for your time, Becky, and your reflections, because they're both fascinating and insightful. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I honestly could sit and talk about it all day. So thank you very much for having me on and letting me have the opportunity to bang on about it a bit more.
Listen, it's fantastic. And I think what we'll do is we'll put the links to the PCT in the show notes, together with blogs, and indeed recollections by people that have completed the trip. So if you want to head to the show notes, you can see more on the Pacific Crest Trail there. So that brings us into close for another session. Please do head over to our website at World Extreme Medicine for more information. Indeed, on our podcast, our webinars, which are just about to come up as well, and indeed a card array of courses. Thanks, guys, and we'll catch you soon. Thanks for listening to the episode. Please feel free to rate, review, and subscribe on whichever platform you're listening to. Please also head over to the World Extreme Medicine website, where you can find more engaging content on extreme medicine webinars and indeed the collection of courses from our global network, including humanitarian, disaster relief, expedition, space, military, tactical, and performance medicine. Thanks again.